Welcome to the Big Me Kickoff. I'm your host, Kevin Noon, and it is Thursday, April 6th. It is draft month, and you know I love the NFL draft, as you do too, and a lot of talk about quarterbacks. And without me getting into a long-winded intro, I want to welcome our guest, Ian Valentino of Pro Football Network. And while I think I know a lot about the draft, this guy here knows infinitely more. He's probably forgotten more about the draft today than I know about it. And, first and foremost, welcome to the show, Ian.
Thanks so much, Kevin. The first thing I know about the draft is I know nothing about the draft because it just things go haywire so fast. These guys get to their teams. But yeah, we try our best, man. We watch these games. We know about these teams as much as we can. And then once the draft starts, it's all about enjoying it and rooting for these guys to succeed.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of talk here about quarterbacks. Every year, it seems that is the premium position right off the top. We're certainly not talking about running backs off the top. I mean, sometimes a great edge rusher or somebody like that could really create a lot of drama, but there's a reason why teams are picking at the top of the draft, and it generally is because they're not very good, and we all love to focus on quarterbacks. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it is. And the value is just, you can't compare it to these veteran deals. You know, Lamar Jackson's really the first guy in his prime to become available. Kirk Cousins before that, reasonably like in free agency. So these trades, we've seen some monstrous trades throughout the years that just cost so much money and so many draft assets that I can see why these teams at the top are like, you know what, Jackson's great, but I don't want to give him $250 million plus 3 first-round picks, 2 first-round picks, or a top 5 pick in exchange to make that happen. It's that known quantity versus, the potential value that you're getting if you hit on one of these guys. So it's very understandable.
Yeah, the dollar figures on a rookie deal are much more palatable than the money that Lamar may be looking for. I mean, kind of in the in the same vein of the deal that Deshaun Watson signed with the Cleveland Browns. And between you and me, I thought they looked better with Jacoby Brissett, but that's just my opinion. I'm not a Browns or Bengals fan. Living here in Columbus, Ohio, between both of those franchises, I speak freely there. I do not have a loyalty one way or the other. We've gotten through pro days for the major 4 quarterbacks, being CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, Will Levis, Anthony Richardson. A lot of that product got moved over to NFL Plus, so not everybody had a chance to see all of that unless you got involved with the free trial over there. I did not get to see all of it. I certainly was at CJ Stroud's. What are some of your biggest takeaways coming out of the pro day windows, where it's a little bit different than at the NFL scouting combine, where NFL teams are kind of running things at a pro day? You're following a script. You're kind of doing what it is you do well. If you're not good at X and Y, we're going to show you A and B instead. I mean, what are your impressions?
Yeah, I thought that for both Stroud and Young, I thought they would have a tough time really improving their stock at the pro days, because I think for them, we've seen everything on the field that they can do, right? Like, they have very obvious pros and cons on the field. And I think it's easier for us to project confidence in them because they've achieved at a high level and they've done it for multiple years. They did it at the biggest programs. They did it on the biggest stage. And so for them, it's more about the details. And I think that the details mean, how does the whiteboard work go? How do the interviews go? How's your work ethic? How's the people around you type of thing? It's a little bit more of the intangibles, right? And I don't think that, Young couldn't go out there and show that he has a stronger arm. He can't show that he's gonna be more durable. CJ can't really show his playmaking traits or his mobility or willingness to be mobile. So I think that those 2 guys really had, in some ways, less to lose on the field because we've seen them dominate on the field in the ways that they win. Whereas I think Levis and Richardson, we could have learned more about them. And I think it's interesting with Levis, I think in particular, because he's probably the strangest case for a top quarterback of the group, because he didn't play particularly well last year. He kind of has that Josh Allen factor around him, where guys around him were considerably worse in 2022 than 2021. And his play kind of dipped alongside that. But he also has a little bit of that Brady Quinn look to him. He's really muscled up. The big guy is really tight in his upper body. And some of that's like, well, are you just going to be a jack dude that doesn't really change to get better? Because I think I like his game. I don't dislike his game, but I think he misses some throws because he has that Quinn type stature where he looks like a bodybuilder. He doesn't look like a football player. And so I think his pro day was a little bit telling that he's had some of this time to work on his mechanics, to make things a little bit smoother, a little bit quicker, a little bit tighter. And he still just shows some of those physical limitations. Even though he's so physically gifted, he's also physically limited because of his build. And I thought Richardson, on the other hand, he showed some of the same strengths and weaknesses. Tremendously powerful athlete, extremely explosive. However, he also had some missed throws. And I think that's going to be the big question for him, where a lot of these pro days you're used to seeing like, okay, you completed 95% of your passes. He had 7 misses. 2 of those were drops. So I wouldn't count those against him. 2 of them, I think, were deep balls, including that one where he hit the roof. And so you don't need to be perfect, right? But it's like, how are you missing? And it's the same ways that you've been missing over the last couple of years that we've seen you. And what is it going to take to fill those gaps and get you to be as good as you can get? So I think both Levis and Richardson kind of both showed they just might not ever be that 65% completion player who's attacking downfield. Like, you're marrying that efficiency with explosive plays. That may not exist for those guys. Maybe it does, but at least the growth curve is more significant than what you've seen with CJ and Bryce. Whereas those guys have a higher floor, you kind of know what to expect a little bit more.
How important is a pro day? I mean, we already kind of see from the NFLPA kind of talking about the importance of the combine, and then we have the pro day. I mean, and then you also have individual workouts and things of that nature. All 32 teams were at Ohio State for its pro day. I'm going to assume the same thing for Alabama in its pro day. I mean, yes, you get to go and you get to see these things. You get to see some guys that weren't able to do certain things at the combine, maybe do anything at the combine. But, neither of us are sitting in the front office of an NFL team right now at this moment. So, maybe they're the only ones who can answer this. But in your opinion, how important is a pro day in the grand scheme of things with all of this information, every game being on TV, all 22 cut-ups being everywhere in terms of for personnel to be able to find what's the level of importance here?
I think for as big as the prospect is, or as notable as they are, the less important as it is. So it's not uncommon to see other guys from other schools go to bigger schools to do their pro days. And I think it's more important for those guys. It's more important for the late rounders, the guys who are trying to become pushed from the 4th round to the 3rd round, or from a priority undrafted free agent to be a 6th or 7th round pick. I think those guys they have to do everything possible. They have to run every test, hit every drill, do as well as possible, nail every interview. The early round guys, I don't think it's super important. I'm not saying they can go there and just blow it off and just not take it seriously, but at the same time, the tape is the tape. And ultimately, teams do value that. Most teams value that as much as anything, if not more than everything. So you get those one-offs with some character concerns. Sometimes it's health, and some of that, you have to obviously go to these pro days, or you have to get medically checked, stuff like that. But outside of those pretty infrequent cases, I think pro days aren't super important, but I do think it's a nice thing to show up and at least show effort at, because you only get one shot, right? Like, this is a truncated 3 months that we go through the draft process. And it seems so silly to put a lot of pressure on these when you've got 3, 4, 5 years of tape and examples of, you being a great person and athlete and all these things. But at the same time, you got to finish strong. It's almost like a marathon, right? Like, you're at that last push. Teams just want to see, are you determined enough? Do you have that charisma and that personality to endure like these exhausting workouts and continued interviews? So I think in some ways it is important, but not in the traditional sense of, oh, your broad jump or your weight was like 5 pounds over from the combine to the pro day. It's like, hey, okay, we might not love that, or, whatever. But at the same time, did you persevere? Did you show up? Did you work hard?
Or you could be Bryce Young and just not agree to weigh in at your pro day for whatever that's worth. And we may get to that again in a second, but you're over at Pro Football Network and you guys do a great job. I highly urge all my viewers and listeners to check out all the work over at Pro Football Network. Is there a consensus amongst your staff there, the staff there at Pro Football Network, of who should be the top-rated quarterback, and in turn, I guess, be drafted by the Carolina Panthers, who possess the number 1 pick? Or is there still some debate there, just as there is amongst all of the talking heads?
Yeah, there's no consensus. I would have Bryce Young probably QB3 or QB4, whereas my coworker Kyle Yates has him QB1. I would take him number 1 overall, whereas I don't really see the argument to take him number 1 overall. So, and throughout our other analysts, it's the same way. I'm very pro CJ or Anthony Richardson number 1. There are other people that are like, oh, good luck if you take Anthony Richardson. There's a huge project there, and I don't really see it that way. And so I think everyone has their own takes. And it's hard because these guys are so different. Like, I don't remember a class where there was such different styles. Like, usually you've got 2 of the more pocket passer, traditional guys that are a little bit statues. And then you've got, maybe a more explosive guy, like a creator. You have a little bit of flavor here and there, but to have 4 guys who are just so different in the way they played and the schemes that they played in and the surrounding talent that they've had, all of it's so different that I think that just lends itself to, it's a really unique class with talented guys. I think you can make a good argument for all 4, at least, to be good or solid starters long-term, if not better. Whereas that's also not usually the case. Usually there's 1 or 2 guys, even if there are 4 first rounders going back to like 2020. I didn't necessarily feel that like Josh Rosen, I didn't really see the argument for him to be a first rounder. Josh Allen, I could see. Baker Mayfield, I could see. Sam Darnold, I couldn't see. So it's not one of those classes. I think each of these guys has a pretty good argument.
Let's kind of go through some of the quarterbacks here. And I mean, obviously you played your hand a little bit about who you think should probably be QB1. And we're going to start there because obviously the lion's share of my viewers are Ohio State fans. So why CJ Stroud? Why should he be QB1, number 1 pick, first Ohio State player to go number 1 overall since, I believe, Orlando Pace? I mean, it's been a long time coming. There's a lot of talk out there that Ohio State quarterbacks don't translate well to the league. Justin Fields is trying to turn that around. Why Stroud 1?
I mean, just truly a dynamic pocket passer. And I think his accuracy, his arm talent, all 3 levels. I mean, that Utah game, I think, was the first time. I mean, and he played well up to that. We know that. He was a good starter before that. But I think Utah was the first time where he really showed. To me, it went back to like Jared Goff and Cal. Like the way Goff was dropping in passes was just, I hadn't seen anything like it. And granted, I was pretty early in my scouting career and stuff, but I hadn't really seen guys do that in a long time in college. And so to me, Stroud kind of reminded me of that, except for a little bit more arm talent and obviously a way better athlete. And we saw that at points in his career, right? Especially Notre Dame, start 2022 season. You saw it definitely against Georgia. I think you see A+ accuracy, probably A to A- arm strength. He can make every throw. You're not concerned about that. Good pocket presence. Really great decision maker with the ball. Like, you're legitimately shocked when he puts the ball in harm's way. Like, there's not, and I love Justin Fields. Like, I thought Fields is a better prospect overall, just a better athlete, more explosive, more powerful type of presence. But at the same time, as a passer, I thought going from Fields to Stroud was almost interesting because they were so different with their mindset. Like, Stroud is so consistent with his timing, and you are so confident that he's making the right decision pre-snap, that post-snap, when it doesn't work out, it's almost like, oh, wow. Like, it's weird that the standard that we almost built for him, because I thought the standard was almost like I expect him to complete 90% of his passes. And I think that's just because he is so good that you got used to seeing him do pretty much everything on the field. And so when he didn't do it, it was like, oh, wow, I kind of expected him to do that. And so when you have time and space to kind of go back to watch without the emotion and the context of like the heat of the game, it's a little bit easier to go back and be like, you know what? And I've said this twice. I said it at the end of 2021 and 2022. I was like, you know what? I almost feel like I was a little bit hard on this guy during the season. And I actually appreciated him a little bit more when I look back at him. And so I think if he can get to what he was doing against Notre Dame, against Georgia, getting outside the pocket, delivering catchable balls while under pressure, I mean, he's going to be a star. That to me is the only question mark. With what he did against Michigan for 2 years, where he didn't really take over the game. And I think that's the big concern with me is like, does he have that gamer trait? Does he have that ability to ascend when he really needs to? I thought he fell short in both Michigan games. It wasn't just him, but I do think that he was part of the struggle, at least on offense, is that he didn't really fully come up to the moment. And we had seen that in a couple first halves throughout his career, especially in his first year. I thought like the first month and a half of his 2021 season, like his first halves were like not good. And then he come out in the second half and he was great. It was just like a totally different player. And so you're wondering, is it just because he was a young guy? Is it just because the stuff, or is there maybe going to be inconsistency in the big moments? If he can answer that question, I think that's going to really determine his upside, because I think his floor is great. And I think you take that number one because it's really hard to take a swing on a guy that could be out of the league in 3 years, as opposed to someone who probably at worst case is at least an average quarterback.
Of course, and nobody's been more critical of Stroud, Ohio State's CJ Stroud, than Ohio State fans. The lack of design Q run, things along that nature. I mean, I think everybody looks at, the prototypical NFL quarterback is Pat Mahomes. No, Pat Mahomes is Pat Mahomes. I mean, that's not. There are a lot of teams out there that would like to have Pat Mahomes.
Yeah.
I mean, how much does that concern you? I mean, does that kind of fall into the gamer type of situation? Because we saw him run in the Peach Bowl against Georgia. We saw run early a design Q run that went nowhere, but on that final drive that ultimately led to the missed field goal, we saw CJ Stroud get out there, get outside the pocket, tuck it and go. I mean, how much of a concern is that, or is that just something that's just kind of on the fan level?
I think it is a valid concern because you are seeing probably 8 to 9 guys at the NFL level being able to create like that and be able to really affect their team's ability to win with multiple ways. And I think you can be a Joe Burrow. But look at Joe Burrow. He's probably the most accurate quarterback in the NFL. He has an incredibly rare confidence about him and pocket presence. And like he kind of overcomes his lack of mobility in other ways. Not that he's a true statue in the pocket. He's not. He can move a little bit, but he's definitely not even like Stroud as an athlete. And so unless if you're that level of a pocket passer, and Stroud is, I think close to that spectrum. I do. I think he has that type of ability within the pocket to make those throws and overcome a really bad offensive line. Not saying Ohio State had one because they didn't, but like Cincinnati does. So it's like, can you overcome that? I do think it's a fair concern, and expect him to be Mahomes isn't fair, but can he at least be maybe like a Deshaun Watson or, obviously he's not going to be, like a Lamar Jackson. No one's like Lamar Jackson, but can he be somewhere on that spectrum of a playmaker between there, where at least he's a threat to run? And I don't really care that he doesn't run. I just want him to get outside the pocket when there's pressure and extend plays and make accurate throws, right? So getting outside the pocket's a plus, but being able to actually do something with it, that also is a separator for guys. And if he can't do that, because there were times where he couldn't do that, and then there were times where he could do that, if he can do that, then I think he definitely fits the profile of at least giving you a chance. Because if you can't get a top 10 quarterback, I don't think he's really worth drafting. And so I think that's where, for me, we're at that point in the league, which has probably changed from 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I think it was a little bit different conversation. It's, you can win with an average-ish guy. And now I just don't think that you can.
Let's turn the page to Bryce Young out of Alabama. Obviously won a Heisman Trophy in the 21 season. 22, Alabama took a little bit of a step back, even though there's still people who will argue until we're going to die on the hill of saying Alabama should have been in the playoffs. That's all immaterial at this point. Bryce Young, multi-year starter at Alabama. A lot of people still have him as the guy. You said that maybe you don't see him right there, but what is the argument of having Bryce Young number one going to Carolina?
For sure. So he stepped up when it mattered most every time. He's a gamer. I think the best thing you could possibly say about him is really the best thing you could say about any football player or any athlete is they're a gamer. He was never afraid of the moment. He made the big throws when he had to. If you that Auburn game, I think it was 2021, when he goes, like 95 yards down the field, for the winner, it's like that was just the best moment that you could possibly see from a player. Even Texas this year, he struggled for 3 quarters against Texas. Fourth quarter, different player. Talk about with CJ Stroud, like comes out in second half, different player. You want to see that in the fourth quarter, and you consistently could count on that out of Young. Really great improviser. Obviously, at his weight and his size, you're expecting him to be super shifty, and he's probably the shiftiest quarterback we'll ever see in the NFL, at least or have seen at this point. And you expect that for a guy who's probably, 20 pounds underweight. But at the same time, like he evades contact in ways that we have rarely seen in the pocket. And he's able to break the pocket. He gets to where he's able to launch the ball. He plays within his own limitations, I think, incredibly well. He's incredibly self-aware of what he can do and what he can't do. I think he's pretty good pre-snap. I think he knows what he's looking at for the most part. Coming out of a Bill O'Brien offense is theoretically going to help him a lot. I do think he left a lot on the table as well, and I don't think he's quite as advanced as some would say. I think there were quite a few examples of like he's not super polished reading, and some of this is just like you play with amazing guys around you. Like it's why Justin Fields has partially struggled too. It's like when you play with 4 first-rounders, it's like, okay, I don't really need to do a whole lot. Sometimes I just need to deliver the ball, but I think he's a really high-end point guard at the position, which is a compliment. But it also does come with some drawbacks to say he has some creative traits. I just don't know that his physical skill set gets him to I think Kyler Murray is a really great example. Kyler Murray has a better arm. He's more explosive. He's faster. And he's still not like a top 10 quarterback. So how does Bryce Young get there when he has less to work with? And I think that would be my big question for him.
And you bring up Kyler Murray, and I was going to bring up Kyler Murray because I've seen some comps out there, and I was like, well, there was a year out there where that was going to be, that's pretty cool. Your comp is Kyler Murray. And now it's like, your comp is Kyler Murray. I mean, it's, we're not that far removed from where if that first number on your height wasn't a 6, you were done for. And I remember when Troy Smith came out and he was 5'11" and like 5'8" or something like that. And, he ends up going to Baltimore, gets sick. Joe Flacco ends up taking the reins, and that's all she wrote, folks. I mean, they're done there. But can we say that this is a league where that under 6-foot quarterback can succeed outside of the outlier, outside of, being, just the 1 in a million type of guy?
I don't think we can yet. I know people want it, but Russell Wilson's it. I mean, Baker Mayfield is, kind of busted out. He's a smaller guy, and he wasn't as small as Bryce, but Kyler has everything that he should succeed. I think there's just something there that is just, it hasn't clicked yet. And some of it might not be his fault. Maybe a new coach, maybe a new staff, maybe they'll totally bring it out of him. They could certainly do more to surround him with, a running game, a better offensive line. Maybe he just needs to continue to get better and be on that path. But until these few guys get a chance, and it's hard, I think outlier is just the best way to put it. And you're betting your career, if you're the Panthers or any of these teams, to say Bryce Young's going to be the outlier. I don't know. Is there a huge difference between him and like Vernon Adams out of Oregon a couple of years ago? Now, Adams was like really small. He was like, I think 2 inches even smaller than Young, but he played very similarly. Very accurate player, very explosive player, never even got a sniff from the NFL. I think he ended up going to CFL or one of these other leagues. And so that line is really interesting to see who gets a chance and who doesn't. I'm not saying Bryce doesn't deserve a chance. The point is probably Adams probably deserved at least like a Troy Smith like shot, even though Smith certainly I think deserved more of a shot in retrospect. But I think we are kind of teetering to where if Kyler doesn't work out, let's say Bryce doesn't become anything special, how is that going to affect future guys? I think it might have a pretty severe kickback, and we might just end up looking at it and saying, you know what, maybe Russell Wilson was just that special for those, handful of years in Seattle.
So we have CJ Stroud, we have Bryce Young, both guys that were on teams that won a lot of games. The next 2 guys were on teams that, while they didn't go 2-10, were not on the highest stage that Ohio State and Alabama were, and that's obviously Will Levis and Anthony Richardson. Now, I've seen some analysts come out there and it's like, Well, what you have to do is you have to look at the fact that these guys were not surrounded by as much talent. So they had to work that much harder. They had to be that much more special to rise to the top. But then again, we're also looking at Anthony Richardson with, how was he? I mean, there were a lot of times he wasn't a 50% passer in games. We look at Will Levis and you talked about, okay, you got a jack dude, but he's got his limitations. I mean, what is the argument of one of these two guys? And could we just be buying into a whole Bryce Young, CJ Stroud argument, and one of these guys sneaks up because Carolina just, in terms of, it only takes one. It only takes one team to pick somebody. Could we see the old switcheroo here?
I think Richardson has the chance. I think in recent weeks, I think it has been a little bit sharper. I think reporting is kind of narrowed in, but the Browns, no one knew they were going to go Baker until like the day of. So I think it's very possible. I think Richardson would be the guy of the two to sneak into that group and overtake them. And it's just because his physical gifts are just so immense. And when I went back to watch him, I mean, there were games where Florida was missing like 4 or 5 of their scholarship receivers. Like they were playing guys that were just, walk-on talents. And you could just tell like guys weren't in the right position. They weren't in the right place. They weren't able to do anything really. And that's just a really tough spot for any quarterback to be in. Florida also ran a very aggressive 2 wide receiver routes a lot of times. So what's the worst thing you could do to give an inaccurate quarterback a chance to survive? And that's giving him 2-man routes as opposed to like, look at Alabama, who's going 4 or 5 wide every play. And it's just kind of giving, easy dunks and, little, even dump offs to the back. It's like, so I'm not saying Richardson is that level of accurate quarterback because he's not right now, but he has a lot of moments where when you look at the context of his film, there are some really impressive moments in there. And you look at that and say, can we consistently get that? Can we get that even one drive a quarter? If we get that one drive a quarter, we're getting to almost 30 points a game. So if we can do that and then marry that with his ability to run, his ability to just create off-platform plays, if we can do that, then we might have someone that could just bring us to a new level. And instead of maybe looking at Stroud, who probably projects to like 5 to 10 in the quarterback rankings in the NFL, Richardson might be like 2 to 5. So he just might bring even that extra oomph to say he makes all of our jobs even easier if he does hit.
But can a team, I'm just going to call it what it is, can a bad team be that patient to sit there? Because, we're seeing very short windows, very short leashes on guys. And if butts aren't in seats and TVs aren't turned on or whatever, owners get really froggy there and make a lot of changes. Can a team be that patient to sit there and try and work with a guy? There's no redshirting really in terms of the NFL. You can't sign and stash somebody and it's like, well, we're gonna train this guy up for 2 years and then we're gonna roll him out in year 3 and it's gonna be great. You're sitting there, if you're using the draft capital, especially the Panthers who make this huge move with the Bears to get the number 1 pick, can they sit there and say, but just wait. It's going to be good. It may be 2025, but it's going to be good.
It's tough. And I think Buffalo, the one thing they deserve more credit for than anything, and they did a phenomenal job, like getting this front office, head coaching, whole coaching staff, phenomenal. It's the best thing that they could possibly do is say, Josh Allen, we're giving you 3 to 4 years. We're blocking out all the noise. We don't care what you do. We believe in you that by year 3 or 4, you're going to be a better player. And they endured 2 just terrible years. I mean, Josh Allen stunk his first 2 years. And I think Richardson's going to probably be the same way. He's probably just going to not be a good player. And you're going to have to go through that. I think it is a tougher sell for Carolina because they did trade up. Buffalo sat it. I think it was like number 7. I think they were able to be comfortable. And they said, you know what, this guy fell to us. If he doesn't work out, he doesn't work out. Okay. It's just a couple of years off of our, maybe our contract. Maybe this is our shot. I don't know. But for Carolina, they've got an aggressive new owner. So that's going to play into it. Frank Reich, he's not exactly young, and he's on his 3rd head coaching job. So I think they do have to look at this with a little bit more urgency. And I think you can always justify Richardson because there is that upside there. But you better have confidence in a way that no NFL team ever has confidence that you're going to still have your job for him to actually be good in 3 years.
We talked a little bit about Levis earlier in the show. Again, you're watching the Big Me Kickoff. I'm Kevin Noon, joined by Ian Valentino of Pro Football Network. Where does Levis kind of fit in? And another name that we're starting to hear a little bit more of is Tennessee's Hendon Hooker, whose season and collegiate career came to an abrupt end with an injury. Could we see a scenario where Hendon Hooker reels him in and goes before him? I mean, we're sitting there, we're talking about Stroud, Young, and Richardson. I mean, should Levis be in that same discussion, or has he kind of started to slide? I mean, again, there's so much noise out there, and that's why I love the draft so much, and I hate it at times because I'm reading multiple mocks, and people within the same organization are openly conflicting with each other on what it is they believe.
Yeah, Levis is going to be, I think, the wild card, because you look at the top 10 order. Some of it is how much stock do you put in some of these team statements, right? So, like if Atlanta, they seem like a prime position to get a quarterback earlier, they are just standing by, Desmond Ritter's side. So maybe they're off the board now for Will Levis. Maybe they're off the board for a Hendon Hooker. I do think a team like the Raiders, I think it's possible the Patriots, the Buccaneers, even the Vikings. So I think those teams should be interested in Levis. I do think that he's not quite in that top 3. To me, I don't see like the all pro level, even like the high end Pro Bowl level. You're probably looking at like a Derek Carr. Nice player, upgrade. Probably can justify taking a first round pick on that, especially if you have no other avenue to get a better player and you need to win sooner than later. And I think that's the aspect. It's like, from a fan, yeah, I don't necessarily want to draft the next Derek Carr. Not that he was bad, he just wasn't great. But at the same time, from a team's perspective, it's different. If we can build a solid winner, a 10-win team around someone like that, and we're picking in the late first round, that might be our best chance, because then we don't have to totally tear down. So I think we do have to look at it from the team's perspective as well. I just don't see him having I don't think he has that special ability to kind of overcome, where it's like where I watched Mahomes at Texas A&M or Texas Tech. He was so dynamic. I mean, I loved him. I had him mock number 2 to San Francisco behind Myles Garrett in that class. Thankfully, he was like the one of all my hits. I think he was probably my best hit. Thank goodness that's the guy I hit on. And I had plenty of misses, but with him, you could project those insane moments to say, like, you know what? I just think he can do it. Levis doesn't really have a lot of that. He's just kind of like that traditional Ryan Tannehill, Derek Carr type, where he's good. I just don't think he's great. I think that will reflect, and I think in recent mocks you're seeing that be reflected, where he's starting to fall closer to 20. With Hooker, I don't think Hooker overtakes him now. And it's funny because Hooker was a much better player on the field. His stats with Tennessee are just obnoxious. Like, I was looking at them yesterday. It's like 58 touchdowns, 5 picks. And it's like, you almost forget that it's just like over 2 years. That is so absurd that someone could do that. Because I remember watching him at Virginia Tech, and it's like, yeah, he's a nice athlete, but like he's not very good. And all of a sudden he turns into, just this dynamic thrower. And I think that's the best way to characterize him, is he's a dynamic thrower of the ball. He's not in any way polished. And I think that teams really have punished guys like that over the years. Malik Willis is a good example of that. Malik Willis fell to late 3rd round last year. And then when he got on the field, he was barely given any leash, and actually benched for someone that was signed off of the street like a week before, Josh Dobbs. And so I think Hooker is a nice investment on day 2, but he's also going to be 25 as a rookie. You're probably going to have to give him that 2 to 3 years, and day 2 picks just generally don't have that same grace. It's generally been a pit for quarterback development. The league just doesn't try. And it's not even that they can't do it. I mean, Bailey Zappi was probably a good example of that. Bailey Zappi was as good as Mac Jones as a rookie, but teams just don't want to invest those day 2 picks because they feel like they have 1 or 2 years to kind of prove that they're the guy. And if not, then they're going to move on. So Hooker's super interesting. I don't know. I can't recall of another guy that's ever emerged like he has. He has a great skill set, but he's even admitted that he doesn't make reads. Everything is just based off of the play call. And so I don't know how you break a guy in like that, unless if you're okay with him breaking out at 27, 28 years old, which is still better than nothing. If he's a franchise guy, that's great. But what does that lead? What kind of investment does that take? It's probably a second or third round pick.
You talk about, the first rounders is kind of where it's at. And if you're day 2, day 3, I mean, there's really no leash and everything else. Is there a name out there? I don't know. I'll throw out like Aiden O'Connell from Purdue, who, was in the Jeff Brom system. Is there a name out there of somebody, and through all of your evaluation and your study as you're getting ready with the draft coming up here at the end of the month, that you're like, we're not really talking about this guy? And with the huge caveat that day 2 and day 3 guys generally, it's a mixed bag. Is there somebody that we should be talking about?
I do think Aiden O'Connell's a good one. He's definitely got some buzz from teams to be that next Bailey Zapp. To be someone who can come in, push either a young guy or even a veteran, be a solid backup with potentially be an average starter one day. I also like Clayton Tune out of Houston. I think he was someone that had the chance to really rise this year. He didn't really grab the opportunity, but it wasn't because he played poorly. He just didn't really ascend. And sometimes development isn't linear, and sometimes a lot of things play into that. And he's still a guy, though, who's a really good thrower, has a good arm, very accurate. It's projecting up in competition. So that's part of it, too. He's probably going to be a 3rd, 4th, 5th round pick. But his talent is probably better than that. And I think last year was just an eye-opening moment where the teams just really, again, Atlanta is committed to Desmond Ridder. There's nothing that Desmond Ridder showed as a rookie to say that he was better as a rookie than he was at Cincinnati. He was a good player at Cincinnati. So if they felt he was a starter, they probably should have taken him in the 1st or 2nd round in last year's draft. And so I just think that because teams aren't having to put that premium development anymore on those types of quarterbacks, whereas they used to. It used to cost you a 2nd or 3rd round pick for like a Jeff Beck. Miami took Pat White and Jeff Beck, I think back to back or something like that. It used to cost teams that 2nd round pick to do that. Now it doesn't. It costs you a 4th or 5th rounder. I think Tune is probably that other guy though. Really experienced. I love that he's so experienced. I think he'll really push for a backup job pretty much right away in his career. And I could see him being a nice spot starter for a team.
We have the benefit here on my last question of hindsight. So we can kind of look back. Looking forward is a little bit different. We can't necessarily predict how this draft class of 2023, and to think about what year it was, the quarterback is going to stack up historically. But we can look at maybe what the draft class of 24 may look like. Caleb Williams, Drake May. How do you think that this 23 draft class shapes up against what could be next year's class? Because, for half a second, Ohio State fans were hopeful, though, maybe CJ Stroud will come back. Maybe they'll get $7 million of NIL money and he'll come back, but then he'd be in the class with these guys. And, I'm forgetting several other names, but, obviously the reigning Heisman winner and Caleb Williams comes to mind, and Drake May. Everybody's just, crazy about what he's been able to do at Carolina. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do think next year, and I hate being that guy because everyone jokes about it, right? Next year is always better, and then we're tearing apart the guys next year. But I do think Caleb Williams, I do think Drake May are better prospects than anyone in this class. I think Richardson, if he would have gone back, he had the real chance to be QB1 next year, or potentially QB3. And maybe he's not it, right? And maybe we would have seen that next year. I think Stroud and May are probably more similar in that they would have had I think it would have been really close between the two, because both players are very high floor players. They're very smart. May is a power thrower. He's very, very attractive to watch, just like Stroud is when he's in the pocket. There's a lot to love. I think he's going to face some of the same question marks now, and you're going to see that. So I don't be surprised where May's facing the same questions next year. It's kind of preposterous to think. It's like, well, what more could Stroud have done than do what he did against Georgia? What more does he have to prove? That should probably be the no doubt number 1 pick in most cases. So May's not going to probably have that opportunity. He probably won't face a defense like Georgia's and do what Stroud did against that. So it's just kind of funny to consider that. But I do think Caleb Williams would be the QB1 if you put all these classes together. I do think he would have. He fits that mold perfectly of what we're talking about. That Patrick Mahomes, that Josh Allen. He's not a 6'5", 250-pound guy, and that's probably the knock. That's fair on him, but he's also not Bryce Young small. So I think it'll be like Kyler Murray, where he probably locks in that number one seed or number one pick, unless if May goes out there and continues to get way better, because he does have the size advantage.
As we're wrapping up here, I want to thank Ian for being part of the show. What are these next 3 weeks like for you guys there at Pro Football Network? What do you have coming up for what should fans be excited about?
Yeah, so we've got a lot of great content coming out. We've got our mock draft simulator, which is free for 7 rounds, and we have a lot of data that we gather from that. And so we put a lot of pointed content out that utilizes that data to kind of say, like, what do fans think? And then we kind of react to how fans are doing mock drafts for their teams, doing a lot of player profiles to look at where they could go, the best fits. Also kind of looking at what teams should do as well from the team perspective, to say, like, I think like Philadelphia, could they be aggressive going for Jalen Carter and pairing up Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter, those type of things. So I think we've got some really unique angles coming up, some data and stuff that other, companies that don't necessarily have access to, or they just don't offer those services. So we're trying to attack it from a unique angle.
Well, I highly recommend everybody check them out there at Pro Football Network. It's great stuff. It's my first stop when I'm looking for draft coverage. And again, anybody who's listened to me in the past knows that I start getting excited for the draft about 10 minutes after the previous draft. So it truly is a 365-day-a-year job. There's no real respite, is there?
No, that's true. We've already got people working on our 2024 stuff, so we'll have it ready as soon as the draft kicks off.
Well, once again, Ian, I want to thank you for joining us here on the show. And I want to thank everybody for joining us here on the show. We went 40 minutes. That's a long show for us, but lots of great stuff there. One topic, quarterbacks. You wanted it. We brought it. But until the next time, I'm Kevin Noon. Thanks for joining me on the Big Me Kickoff. We will talk to you very soon.